Today I want to show you guys how to assemble and install these Bullfrog manual turnout controls by Fastrax. They're super easy to put together, super fast. Let's get started. Okay, so before we get into the assembly part of this video, which I actually filmed a few weeks ago, I want to talk a little bit about some things that I learned while building and installing a whole bunch of these things over the past few weeks. The first thing I want to mention is this wire that the Bullfrogs come with. Now, if you're doing a larger scale, like HO scale or O scale, this is probably totally fine. But as far as N scale goes, this wire is way too heavy duty. You're gonna damage your turnouts with this. It's way too thick. It's really hard to see it on camera here, but this is a very thick wire. The gauge is 0.39. Inches, I guess it is. I'm not even really sure, but the gauge is 0.39. It's a little too thick for N scale and it's a little too stiff. So the main problem is that when you go to put this, when you install it into your turnout, it puts way too much pressure on the little N scale switch points. So especially if you're using Atlas Code 55 like I am, it can cause the blades to sort of like lift up out of place if you put too much pressure on them. So this wire is just a little bit too thick. It's also really hard to work with. It's very difficult to cut and it's very difficult to bend. Now I've been told that once you install these into your layout, you can cut this wire with a Dremel. But you try cutting using a Dremel next to an N scale turnout and tell me how it goes. It's not good, it's not safe, you're gonna damage things, you're gonna melt ties. It's not good. So the only way to cut this wire is with these like heavy duty wire cutters, which work pretty good for cutting this kind of wire, but the problem is once you get it installed, you can't get it flush. Get it as close to the turnout as you'd really like. So what I recommend as far as N scale goes is, at least, is to replace the 0.32 wire with this lighter gauge wire, which is 0.39. Replacing the 0.39 wire with this wire, which is 0.32. So this is just some music wire from, I actually got this at Hobby Lobby for what, $1.49. You get 4 pieces in here. This is enough for me to do about 8 turnouts because I've got 2 inches of foam. So this is the wire that I'm replacing it with. It's still really difficult to cut this stuff. You do still need to use a heavy duty wire cutter in order to cut it, but it's a little bit easier. And in fact, I have had luck using just a pair of regular flush cutters to trim this wire down a little bit. But if you're gonna use these things and trim off a little bit, you like wear safety goggles and protect your eyes, because these little pieces, you know, they will fly off at Mach speed. I've actually had them embed themselves into my hand. So definitely, when you're trimming this wire, be very careful with it. But this wire is much more flexible and it's pretty much exactly what I think we need for N scale, especially through about 2 inches of foam. It seems to have just enough tension on it to hold the turnouts in place and without pushing them too hard. So I recommend that. It's much easier to work with. Like I said, you can get it probably at any hobby shop or Hobby Lobby. 0.32 music wire there, good stuff. Okay, so the next thing I want to mention is sort of a 2-part note. If you're like me and you're not going to use the micro switch that's included with this to power your frogs, I'm not using these because I have frog juicers that I'm using, and it's just simpler to wire up. If you're not using these, and you're mounting your Bullfrog within about 12 inches of your fascia, maybe 14 inches or so, I don't think you need to use this part. I'm gonna refer to this as the cage or the support. We'll call it the cage. Basically, this is just here for you to feed your actual throw mechanism through and to give it a little bit of support. But if you're mounting it close to your fascia, this just sort of gets in the way. So what I've been doing is just building them just like this. It's just basically the top part without the cage. And that's all I need. Obviously this is not fully assembled. I still need to add the little flip-flop part, but I do that as I'm installing these so I can put the wire in. So all you really need, it's just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's 5 pieces And you could build these in maybe 2 minutes. Very quick installation or build. And you really don't, this wire here, or whatever you call this piece of tubing, as well as the red tubing that this feeds through, this is what's included when you're installing these. It's very stiff. So you really don't need that support if you're going, you know, maybe about the distance from the right-hand side of the screen to there. It supports itself, it's good enough. So the other part of this is the way that they want you to install the actual mechanism to attach the throw rod, I guess we'll call it, to here is incredibly wonky. And it's just impossible. So if you follow the directions with these, let me get them out. If you follow the instructions for installing the throw rod portion of this, what they want you to do is to put the screw part in, this little metal piece, and then use this little gear looking piece as like a wrench, and then feed your yellow tube through and wrench it onto there and then cut this piece off. Forget about that. It doesn't work. It's absolutely impossible. Good luck getting your hands in there when this is installed to the underside of your layout. Like, you know, I don't have huge hands, but I already can't get my hands, you know, into that spot. So here's what I'm doing. Pretend that this is not here, or even if this part is here. The way that I mount these is I'm gonna take the metal piece that actually goes into here, okay? Install it onto the end of your tube first. So let me do that quick. So you're gonna really need to twist this in. I've never been successful getting this fully threaded in, but it really doesn't matter. Get it as tight as you can. You're gonna chew up your fingers doing this. Maybe if you used a wrench in your left hand, that might help as well. So the way that I've been doing this is to take this piece, you're gonna thread it into here like you normally would. That's how they want it, right? So now this yellow piece is supposed to go through the hole here. All you do is just push this back, feed it through, keep some tension on there. It doesn't look pretty, and it definitely puts a lot of like pressure on this wood, but it's gonna save you. This is also why I don't use this piece, is because it's just a pain, it's just impossible. So just feed it through. This stuff is pretty flexible. You might have to force it a little bit. It looks nasty. All right, there we go. Now you can mount this to the underside of your layout. And then I would just feed this part right through to the front of your fascia. You can run it right through your wire here, your red wire or red tubing. And then you can just mount it. Obviously, for me, like I said, I'm not using this cage part. So if you're not using this, all you have to do is just feed this yellow tube through the front part of your fascia, through this red tube. There is a step in the process of assembling these that recommends that you wax this part. This is the only wax I have. It's just from like a tea light, tea candle. But just rub it on here. I really recommend that you do this. Rub it on that side, and then whatever side of this part, because this is a movable hinge, whatever side you're gonna use, also wax that. It really does help with the movement of it. So don't skip that step. I can't recommend that enough. It makes it so much more fluid when you're switching these things. Definitely do not skip the wax part. All right, so you can see how I've got these positioned under here. I don't have the cage on any of these. I'm only about a foot, and that red tubing is enough to support the turnout here. So I can actually, which one is it? There we go. I could still throw it just fine. That's only about 8 to 10 inches from there. And these move pretty good. You wanna make sure that your wires are clear, but other than that, you really don't need that cage on there. They work just fine without it. Let me see if I can hold my hand steady here for a second. They work really nicely. All right, so when you get your Bullfrog kit, this is pretty much how it looks, how it comes. You get your laser cut pieces, you get the micro switch with a little bit of hardware, and you get your throw rod. Now the first thing you're gonna wanna do obviously is break these apart carefully. And we'll set aside the throw rod. Now these little pieces here, I'm not gonna be using them. This is to actuate the micro switch that's in here, and I'm using frog juicers, so I won't be using the micro switch, so I'm just gonna set these pieces off to the side for now. The kit does come with instructions. I will be looking at them. They're pretty straightforward, and you can pretty much put one of these together in 10 minutes or so, once you kind of get the hang of it. They're pretty simple. The actual throw rod mechanism, the control rod, is sold separately. So if you buy this kit, you have to buy the rods separately. But otherwise, this is the just the turnout control assembly kit. So we'll get started with that. I'm gonna open this. And there's a little ball bearing in here. Make sure it doesn't roll away on you. Get rid of that. So these mechanisms can actually be built in two different directions. The instructions show you how to assemble them so that the throw rod is on the left-hand side, so it'll face underneath the layout just like this. But you can build it in reverse so that it's on the opposite side. I'm just gonna follow the directions as it is and build it straightforward. So the first thing we're gonna do, we need these pieces right here. And they have a little arrow on them to show which direction it's gonna be built on. And you wanna pay attention to that because that same arrow is gonna show up on the instructions here. So you wanna make sure the orientation is the same because it does make a difference depending on how you put it together. So we're gonna have our arrow facing to the left for this one. So the first thing we're gonna do is add these little nuts. I find it easiest to press them in before you assemble these two pieces together, so that's what I'm gonna do here. And then the next part of this is that we're gonna take a little bit of white glue and we're gonna glue these two pieces together like this. Okay, and last we have this little piece here. And this is gonna go right into here. And all you need is a little bit of white glue for this. Nothing fancy, you don't need wood glue or anything. I've been doing this with white glue, totally fine. And now this piece is gonna hold the assembly together. Okay, so we can set that aside for a moment. The next part of this is we're gonna need this piece here. So now you have to be careful in the directions it shows you. We're on step 2 here. This is the part we need. These two pieces look very similar, so make sure you grab the right one. So it's not this one, we're gonna use this one here. So following the orientation of the directions here, we've got the arrow facing up. We're gonna take the piece that we just assembled, and then it's gonna go right into here. And then we have these two pieces are next. Okay, now we can put this off to the side. Now we need the part with the jigsaw pieces on the side of it. And again, arrow is oriented that way. There's two other pieces that look very similar, these two. You'll notice this one has more teeth on it than this one. And that is important because of how it's gonna mount. You'll see that there's more teeth on this side than there are on this side. So we'll go ahead and put a little glue on here. helps if you don't drink an entire pot of coffee before doing this. All right, and while we wait for that to set up, we could do the next part. We're back to this piece here. While we wait for this to set up, we can work on bending our throw rod. So the directions come and show you how you have to bend it. My throw rod is not bent anywhere near what this looks like, and this is really heavy wire, so you have to take a minute to bend it. What I would say is that start with this bend here off of this already pre-bent spot and go up maybe 3/4 of an inch to an inch. So they don't give you any information as to how far you're supposed to bend it or any measurements or anything like that. You have to kind of just eyeball it. I found that it's about an inch or so. The idea is that we want to put a bend in it here so that it will fit around the bottom side of, it won't interfere with any of the mechanisms in here. So we have to put this bend in here. And what I'll do is go up maybe about an inch or a little bit less than an inch, I find is pretty good. And then just sort of crank it like that. And then I'm gonna take this piece here and I'm gonna bend it down. And we'll have to make some fine adjustments here, but it should look something like this when you're done. Okay, so this should be dry enough now. What we're gonna do is we're gonna put these two pieces together. We got our first part and then our second part. So what I'm gonna do is put some glue on here. I like to just give it a good squeeze, make sure everything is nice and bonded together. You don't want any gaps or anything loose because this is going to be moving back and forth. You want to make sure that it's structurally sound. So the next part of that is that we're going to install the wire into this piece here. And again, we want to look at the arrows. So this is the orientation that I'm going with. We've got an arrow here. The throw bar is going to go right into this hole. And then it goes up. So you want it in this sort of orientation where it can fit in here and still be vertical, if that makes any sense. They recommend with this that you put a little bit of wax on the wood part here, and that helps kind of lubricate the area. So I've got a candle that I'm using and I'm just rubbing a little bit of wax on it. I do recommend this. It does make it a little bit more fluid with its movement. So I'll just take that and kind of rub it on there a little bit. And that's pretty good. So the next part of this is we're gonna take our spring and we put the spring in the hole here. And then we're gonna take our ball bearing and we're gonna put our ball bearing on top of the spring. And that's what's gonna help hold this whole thing in place. So in order to attach this mechanism to this mechanism, we're gonna use one of the shorter screws. There are 4 screws included in this, and one of them is shorter than the others. Make sure you go for the short one first, okay? So we're gonna use the short one, and we're gonna need the wooden washer and a metal washer. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna put the metal washer on first, and then we're gonna put the wooden washer on, and then we're gonna put that off to the side for a second. And then we've got to take our throw bar here and we're gonna thread it through this hole. And that little ball bearing will fit right in there. So then we've got to take our screw with our washers and get it into this top hole here. And then we can thread it in. So I don't usually go all the way down with it right off the bat. You want to leave a little bit of wiggle room there. And then what we're gonna do is we're gonna take one of our longer screws and a washer. That's gonna go here. And again, you don't want to go all the way down with this. You want it to, it's a moving mechanism. You don't want to pin it in place. So leave a little bit of wiggle room in there. You want it to be able to move freely. And that's it. It looks like I probably could have bent this a little bit sooner. It's a little long, but that shouldn't be too much of a problem. I might try to fix that. You can kind of see that that bend kind of goes on an angle a little bit. It's not a huge deal. It could probably work as is, but I'm probably gonna take this apart and then fix it. And that's it. So in order to fix that, I just cut off the bend that I had there, and I'm just gonna add a new one. This is not the easiest stuff to bend. There we go. There we go. And I forgot to mention, if you are using the micro switch, which as I said, I am not, the next part of this would be to install those little wooden pieces that I removed at the beginning, and you install the micro switch underneath here, and that allows the micro switch to be flipped anytime you throw the junction of the track. But again, I'm not using these because I'm using frog juicers, but if you don't have frog juicers and you want to use sort of a classic old school method of powering your frogs, you can use this. But I'm not even gonna include it because I don't need it, so at this point I'm considering this one done. Okay, so I can't really show you how to mount this on my layout because of the access underneath my layout, but I'm gonna show you an example just using a piece of foam. These are very easy to install. The first thing you're really gonna wanna do to really help things out, and this was recommended to me by somebody on Facebook, you're gonna need to drill a hole for the throw bar to go through. And the best way, if you're using a foam base to do this, like I am, this is exactly the foam that I'm using, is to actually use a piece of brass tubing and to sort of use it to core out a hole in the foam. So what I did was I got a piece of 1/4 inch brass tubing. This is just a 1/4 inch from Hobby Lobby or whatever. And I used a file and I just kind of scraped the inside to sort of sharpen it up a little bit. It's not sharp to the touch, but it's also not as thick as if I didn't sharpen it. You can kind of see that on the camera there. But just sort of file it down a little bit so that it's a little bit thinner. And then what you're gonna do is you're gonna just put this into your drill, sort of like you would a drill bit, right? And then what you could do is just drill a hole right into your foam, wherever your turnout is gonna go. And it cuts a really nice, clean hole. It kind of leaves a bit of a damage on the rear side, but otherwise there's not really a whole lot of scruff on the inside of that, which is really nice. It's a nice clean hole for you to put the throw rod through. So the next part of this really is pretty simple. You take your bullfrog, let's say this is the bottom of the layout. Well, let's say this is the bottom of the layout because I went through the other way. And you're just gonna poke it up through here. Hopefully you've got your turnout on the top here and you've got a hole drilled. You just line it up and then you could just drill this right into your foam or whatever your base is. And it's got some grooves here you can kind of see so that you can make adjustments little fine adjustments once you get it on. One thing you're gonna wanna note is when you're mounting this, you have to put the screw in and then use this little window to access it. That's the only way to get there. So just keep that in mind. If you're putting this into a tight space, it's gonna be even tighter with this mechanism. If you are mounting this control unit like really close to the front of your fascia, you don't even need to use this bottom box part. You can just have the control rod go straight into it and activate it that way. But at this point, you would basically just screw this in and mount it, and then trim the top, the excess off of the top. What I would recommend is that you do a test fitting first, just to identify what the length of the rod is that you need. Then take this off and then cut it wherever you mark it, and then actually fully install it, because this is a really, really hard wire. The only thing that I have been able to use to cut it is one of these really like heavy duty nippers. That's the only thing that I can cut this stuff with. So bear that in mind. If you try to use like regular clippers like one of these, or if you try to use like wire cutters or something like that, you're gonna damage them. You need a heavy duty wire cutter to nip this, and it's really difficult to do once it's installed, trust me. So you're gonna wanna measure it, figure out exactly what length you need, take it back out, and then cut it, and then install it permanently, because it's just too hard to actually snip it once it's installed. But that's it. It's pretty simple, pretty straightforward to use, and I hope you guys found this useful.